This is the Whimsy Farm Podcast. I'm Carolyn Crane.
There's a big wide world right out your door. Good people doing good things. Whoa, it's a big, big wide world. Now is the time. Now is our time.
Welcome, everyone. Today I talk with Barb Barton, author of Manoomin, the story of wild rice in Michigan. Barb is a woman of myriad talents, from singing and songwriting to filmmaking. She's a scientist and a student of the cosmos, and she's a passionate activist for social and environmental justice. She lives a couple hours from the farm in Lansing, Michigan's capital. I think this is a fabulous book for so many reasons. One of which is it's a balance of a true work of scholarship, but there's so much heart and soul in it. It doesn't read like a work of academia, but it's backed up like a work of academia. So from the preface through the afterword, I was riveted. And I have a few questions to ask, and then I thought, we might skate off from there into conversation as well. The first one is and the preface is interesting because it talks about your relationship with Manoomin and how you ended up writing this book. And could you tell us a little bit about how that came to pass?
Yes. So I had collected quite a bit of information about Manoomin, and I was thinking of publishing an article perhaps in a journal, Natural Areas Journal, or some conservation-minded publication. And then I realized that I had way more information than a journal article would warrant. I was thinking about writing a book, and one of my supervisors happened to know somebody at MSU Press, had lunch with her that day. They were very good friends, and mentioned to her I was thinking about writing this book. I got invited to lunch the very next day and said, we want that book. So I was very lucky, as an author goes. I didn't have to shop it anywhere. I just had to write it. But it took a long time. I wrote it 3 different ways. And based on feedback that I got, it ended up being in the current form that it is now. So it was a very long and arduous process.
So you already knew a lot about Manoomin
Mm-hmm.
by the time you signed the contract. How did your relationship with it look until that point? And as far as starting to write the journal articles, what was your relationship with the wild rice, which I read somewhere is the only native grain in North America?
Yes, my relationship with Manoomin was a very deep, I would say spiritual one. My introduction to this plant was through my friend Roger Labine from the Lac Vieux Desert Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. And I was very fortunate that he shared with me, as well as his family members, traditional teachings about Manoomin and how important it was to the Anishinaabe people here. And so that was how I learned about the plant. And I found whenever I was in a rice bed, it just moved me. It just moved me very deeply. And that sense of relationship with the plant has remained steady ever since. I was very curious, though, how I could have worked in the field of endangered species biology and had a master's in ecology, all my education here in Michigan, and I never heard of wild rice before. That was baffling to me. So I thought perhaps it was rare. And that was what got me thinking and researching, where are the rice beds here? Where were the rice beds here? And that led me down the path of the historical research that I did.
We'll talk some more about that later as we get into the history of it. Um, Early on in the book, you tell like the life story of Manoomin from
Mhm.
beginning to end. Could you share that with us?
Sure. So I'll start with the winter time. In the wintertime, the seeds of Manoomin are down in the muck in the bottom of the lake or the riverbed, and they'll stay down there until springtime comes and the water warms up, the ice breaks, and once the water temperature gets warm enough, the seeds will sprout and grow up into what's called the floating leaf stage. And when you see Manoomin in that stage, to me, it looks a lot like long hair, green hair. The leaf blades are wider. Um, I think of hair as being, very thin. The blades are wider, but they flow like hair would flow in the water. It stays in that stage up through June, and then what happens is it starts to what I call stand up. It sends up the main stem and becomes in its emergent form, coming up out of the water. In July, in early August, it'll be flowering, and then in the um, early fall, usually late August, early September, it will start to um, have seeds that become ripe, and they'll start dropping into the water. The thing that's really unique about Manoomin and helps it keep going is that the seeds all ripen at a different time on the plants. So that's why people, if they go harvest, can go several times down the same row in consecutive days because of this uh, ripening of the seeds.
You explain how Manoomin was all indigenous to Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
but somehow it got pretty much wiped out of Michigan for all intents and purposes. And you explain how in various ways in various parts.
Mm-hmm.
One of those is right down the road from where I am, and here in Monroe County, and that was the Monroe Marsh.
Mm-hmm.
So, could you talk a little bit about the Monroe Marsh's history and its demise?
Yes. Um, the Monroe Marsh, there's so much history there with Manoomin, but also with water rights and laws in Michigan related to water. Back in the early 1900s, that marsh was internationally known for its incredible duck hunting. People would come from all over in the fall because there was so much rice there. It was a favorite feeding spot for waterfowl moving through. And what happened in the 1800s, the Army Corps of Engineers decided to start dredging the main rivers that flowed out of Michigan into the Great Lakes. They wanted to straighten them for shipping, and the Monroe Marsh was one of those places. They started in the early 1800s, and in the book, I think there's maps in there that show the change in the river channel as it's straightened and straightened and straightened. The marsh over time started reducing in size, and today there's virtually nothing left of it. From the historical literature, I was able to get estimates that the marsh was somewhere between 4 and 5,000 acres in size, and the majority of it was wild rice. There was a really beautiful hand-drawn map that was done, in very early 1900s of the vegetation of that marsh. It was drawn during a period of high water levels in the Great Lakes. Manoomin has to grow in water 6 inches to 3 feet deep. It can grow a little deeper, but what happens is it has to put all the energy into the plant to grow up to get through the deep water and has nothing left to put out seed. So 3 foot's about the deepest where you'll get plants with seeds. In the Great Lakes, when the water levels get too high, the size of the rice beds shrink. And when the water levels drop, there's more suitable depths of water for it to flourish, so it will grow bigger. The beds will be bigger. That map in the early 1900s still showed a lot of Manoomin, but it was at a high water period. And just what was there in the high water period is mind blowing when you think about how much would have been there during the low water period. But over time, the rice disappeared, and that's pretty much true for all along Lake Erie.
One of the things that happened involved paper. That
Yes,
interested me, the
yes,
paper company.
yes, that was an incredible story. When I finished writing the book, I thought, oh, I need to go back and look at all the historic newspapers. I didn't anticipate finding anything about rice, but I was very wrong. One of the stories was about a young boy who had been walking down the street, I believe in Monroe, carrying a big armload of grass. And there was a gentleman there from the Niagara Paper Company who was out on his business trips looking for sources of materials to use to make paper. He saw this young fellow, said, "Hey, what do you have there under your arm?" And he said, "Oh, I got some wild rice here." And he said, "What are you going to do with that?" And he was using it for a bed for his pig. So he learned where this Manoomin was. He went out, took some out, sent it back to New York. They tested it to see what quality of paper it might make. Turns out it was one of the highest quality papers they'd ever seen. So the Monroe Paper or the Niagara Paper Company, they decided to make this a profitable excursion, and they actually designed a rice harvesting boat to go out and harvest the rice. Their plan was to harvest all of the Monroe Marsh, all the rice in the Detroit River, and all the rice in Lake St. Clair with this boat that they had created. Well, what they found out was that the rice was too heavy to ship, and that put the kiboshes to the whole thing, which was good because they would have probably wiped out the rice sooner than it left because of all of the things going on in the rivers. But it was really interesting searching and searching for threads of that story. And I was able to find that they were going to have their headquarters for this new kind of paper right there in Monroe. And yeah, and the story just stopped. I had the Michigan library folks researching for me, trying to find something else about this young fellow's wild rice. And um, but I did learn that I think they printed 2 or 3 editions of the paper in New York, a newspaper, out of the wild rice from Monroe Marsh. What a thrill it would be to find that and just hold it in your hands, you know. But I never could find what issues or what year to know for sure.
That's a fascinating story. I get such a vivid picture of the little boy with carrying the rice home. Yeah.
Yes.
Another interesting thing about let's see, there was the paper production, and then I know logging. Logging was
Mm-hmm.
a big reason for the demise of Manoomin. But what really interested me was the malaria side of the story. Can you talk a little bit about how malaria or panic about malaria
Hmm.
affected the crop of Manoomin.
Sure. That was also a late discovery for me. I had no idea that there was a malaria epidemic in Michigan here and elsewhere. And that started in the 1850s, I believe. And most of the people who were sick at that time, whatever their illness was traced back to them having malaria. And in those early days, they didn't know how malaria was transmitted. They had all kinds of ideas that maybe it was from dead animals in the water, maybe it came from rotting vegetation in the water, maybe it was a celestial event where it just appeared. They didn't know. But all they knew is that wherever there was swampland or wetlands, that's where malaria was. So the public health officials in Michigan decided to start draining as much wetland as they could in order to get rid of malaria. There, it is actually written that their goal was to drain the entire state of its wetlands, all of them. I found that pretty incredible to think that it would have been possible. But in after 1900, it might have been around 1906 or so, I think. In Europe, someone discovered that mosquitoes were the vector for malaria. So, and they also learned that mosquito larvae can survive in smaller um, puddles of water and things like that. So, as they're trying to drain all of the wetlands, now they are also putting in oil and gas, kerosene on top of the surface of the water because the larvae of the mosquitoes, they call them wigglers, they have a little tube that they breathe through that's right at the surface of the water. So if you cover them up with oil or whatever, kerosene, you suffocate them. And that is absolutely not very healthy for aquatic plants, particularly wild rice.
I imagine it's environmentally devastating.
Yeah, yeah. So there was a lot of loss of wetlands because of that draining. And then, of course, they would turn that land into farmland.
If you go back in time in our imaginations to before uh, the colonization of Michigan,
Mhm.
was malaria a problem for the Anishinaabe? Were they dying of it? What did they fear the marshes? How come this is all of a sudden a problem when the colonists are here?
That's a good question that I don't know the answer to. Um, I'm not sure why. I'm not sure. That's a really good question and one I would really like to look at and see because
I'm wondering what
they're
if
all
there was
swamp.
something that got some equilibrium that got upset
Hmm.
that tilted it somehow because you would think that they would have reacted to this mystical disease
Yes.
right around their food production. I mean, I feel like there's a missing piece there.
Yes. That is a very good question. I don't know what the difference would be, or if malaria. I don't even know if malaria originated here or if it was brought over by the colonists. Um, that's a really good question, and now I've got my curiosity up.
Well, let me know, update
I
me,
will. I will.
and I'll update you if I find
Please
anything.
do.
Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about another thing I found delightful about your book is that you begin each chapter in a special way with the voice of a contemporary Native person talking about their relationship with Manoomin.
Hmm.
And one chapter I thought was very neat was that the writer wrote about you and your involvement with harvesting and the projects. And that was, I think, chapter 3, I think. And I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about that experience that the writer includes you in. She writes, We started out our journey in Caseville looking for the long grain rice. Daisy Costas and Barb Barton did the water ceremony and prayed. The winds were not too bad out there on Lake Huron. And she goes on to describe her adventure. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that in your own words.
I had just learned about the rice out there. Uh, I knew from the historical literature that there were vast rice beds there. And we had decided to go out and look for it. And the first night, unfortunately, we arrived there and there was a huge thunderstorm and it knocked off all of the ripe grains of rice. We ended up um, going out a little ways in canoes to try to find plants. We did find a few, and then we went around and up to Tawas and up in that area, and we went out on Tawas Lake. And at that time, there were very few people, as far as I know, that were aware of the wild rice bed there. So we went out there to see it, and it was quite funny. Kelly and Daisy's canoe tipped over, and Daisy is an elder, and it was just hilarious. Kelly's a very strong woman, and we watched her lift that canoe up and flip it so that it was sitting the way it's supposed to. I've never seen anything like it. It was quite fun. But for the tribal people, Roger was with us also. For the tribal people to be out there in that Manoomin when they hadn't been in this part of the state for so long, it was just wonderful. It was just absolutely wonderful. And I had gone out on Saginaw Bay and out to Wildfowl Bay on airboat a couple times trying to find the rice. That was written about in the original General Land Office survey notes. And the first time I went out, I found several acres of rice amongst the little islands there. Second time I went out, I couldn't find any at all. So I don't know if it was a high water, low water thing, um, but it was really moving to be able to be with my tribal friends and experience that with them, especially Roger. The first time he saw the rice on Tawas Lake, he got tears in his eyes. He just couldn't
Wow.
believe that we had that still. And that's not that big. That rice bed at that time I estimated it was about 700 acres of rice. When you think of the historical beds we had that were thousands of acres in size, that Tawas Lake is the largest we have left, and there's nothing else that comes close to it.
And is that you mentioned in the book that there's one large stand of rice left from
Mhm,
pre-colonial times. Is that
mhm.
it?
Yes, that's the one.
So of all of the hundreds that were existed, the one that you just spoke of is the one that somehow made it through all the
Mhm,
logging and the eradication of the swamplands because for the colonists they were inconvenient and dangerous,
mhm.
right?
Yep.
Is that accurate?
Yes, and it's a very shallow lake. In fact, the first time I heard about Tawas Lake was very early in my research. I came across a publication by the Medical Association, and they were actually traveling around the state looking for wetlands and swampy areas and looking for places where malaria existed so they knew where to target their efforts for draining. And they described this large lake that was completely covered in rice. And that was the first, I think, the very first reference I found actually to wild rice outside of the Lac Vieux Désert that I had seen in the Western UP. And that was in a medical journal. So it was pretty incredible. But that was in the 1800s. So we know that Manoomin had been there for a very, very long time. And there have been plans, I've heard two times in history where they wanted to dam up the river because the lake, there's a river that flows into Tawas Lake and then the Tawas River that flows out into Lake Huron. They wanted to put a dam there to raise the water levels, which would be very bad for the rice. Luckily, that's never come to pass.
The end of your book, it sounds like it won't come to pass because it seems that there is a revival of interest in Manoomin and also a trend. We hope it's more than a trend, but so far, at least a trend of giving the power of restoring and reviving Manoomin back to the native people of Michigan.
Mhm.
So can you talk a little about what you found out about that? And is there hope? Is it a hopeful situation? What's it look like to you?
That particular location has been a very unique thing, I think. There was a push several years back to put in an aquatic herbicide, basically, to get rid of the rice because people were finding it choking off their areas around their docks, etc. And they wanted to have more open water to recreate in. And so that brought in the Eagle, what used to be called the DEQ, that brought in the government officials. And there were lots of meetings, I think, contentious meetings that happened over the years of people who wanted to protect it and people who wanted to get rid of it. And in the end, I know the Saginaw Chippewa tribe has bought property around the lake, on one end of the lake. There's been a big effort to try to provide education to the local folks there in Tawas, so that they can understand that this isn't a weed. This is really an important plant, especially to the tribal folks. They did hand pulling. I was out with Eagle and one or two of the Lake Association folks when they first went out and did a tour. And I had thought about why can't they just do some hand pulling and then transplant those plants someplace else. In the end, they actually did that. And tribal folks went out and did a lot of hand pulling around the docks. And now I think the environment and atmosphere over there is more friendly toward wild rice because of all the educational work. I finally got to speak there at the end of last year for the first time, and I was so happy to be able to share the story and just be so happy for those folks that have this lake there because it's truly a gem in Michigan, because of the status of wild rice and what it used to be here on the landscape. It's something that definitely needs to be protected there and enjoyed for what it is. And I think the local folks are starting to realize that.
I was wondering if there was a part in the book that you would maybe read for us, a favorite passage, or would you gift us with a short reading?
I've often, I often lean toward the macabre. I know I came across several references about people dying in the rice beds because they would get stuck in there.
I could see that.
Yeah. One fellow was, oh, this one here, he was bathing in the Iron Bridge over the Huron River 4 miles south of Pinckney and got tangled up in the weeds and wild rice growing in the river. And before anybody could reach him, he drowned, just taking a bath in the river. So I think this is an interesting one about, oh, I hope don't butcher these names. I don't speak French. This part of the book, it's early on, talks about the early French explorers and what they found. coming in. The early French explorers, Pierre-François Xavier de Charlevoix and René Robert Cavelier de Sales, provide us with a glimpse of what the western shore of Lake Erie looked like in the late 1600s and early 1700s, from Buckley's 1913 book, The History of Monroe County. Listen to the words of the enthusiastic Charlevoix and of La Salle in their journals of voyages and adventures amid the lakes and streams, in their bateaux and canoes propelled by the hardy voyagers. Great and luxuriant fields of wild rice and the sweet flags of grapes and berries extend ahead of us and around us for miles. The streams and the trees along their borders are festooned with magnificent vines bearing the great clusters of purple grapes, and the morasses swarming with waterfowl. They, of course, were not the only explorers to notice Manoomin. Massachusetts-born explorer Jonathan Carver left Boston in 1766 on a sailing trip to Fort Michilimack by way of Albany and Niagara. His travels carried him into Lake Erie, up the Detroit River into Lake St. Clair, through Lake Huron to the Straits of Mackinac. Carver's journal entries upon reaching the Detroit River area states that there were great quantities of wild rice in the watered lands near Detroit between Lake Huron and Lake Erie. But on inquiry, I learned that it never arrived nearer to maturity than just to blossom, after which it appeared blighted and died away. Carver blamed this blight on high winds coming down the river channel. In addition to the vast wild rice beds in the Detroit River, there were 3 large marshes along the western coast of Lake Erie. The southernmost, Erie Marsh, extended intermittently from near Otter Creek to the Ohio line, broadening in places and including some small areas of open water. The Monroe Marsh encompassed an area 1 mile south of Brest to the mouth of Plum Creek, and it included the mouth of the River Raisin, and the third marsh, Point Moulier, extended from the mouth of the Huron River to Stony Point. Manoomin was abundant in these places and extended up the coastal tributaries, providing important habitat for many species.
I love that part too.
It's fantastic.
It's just amazing to imagine how different it was.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the River Raisin used to be called the Neme River or Sturgeon River by the tribal people there. But you heard their observing of all of these wild grapes hanging from the trees. They named it River Raisin.
Oh, that's why.
Yes.
I live so close to River Raisin, and my property abuts the Saline River right before it
Mhm.
it goes into the River Raisin. So
Nice.
that's just right in my backyard.
It's nice.
So let's talk a little bit about this is also good stuff to eat. How do you, when they harvest it, what has to happen before they eat it, before we eat it or anyone eats it?
Yes, it's quite a process. So when you go out and harvest the rice, the first thing you have to do is to dry the rice. So there's tarps that are spread out, and you spread all the wild rice out on the tarps in the sun, and stir it around a few times every day. If it's a really warm, sunny day, not too humid, it'll be dry in maybe a couple of days. Sometimes it takes maybe 3 days. Once you get that dried, then the next step is to parch it. So the traditional way is you build a fire, let it get down to coals or, with a little bit of flame, and you put it in a big tub and use a wooden paddle, excuse me, made of cedar, and you put handfuls of the rice in the tub and spin it around the tub. Usually when I've done it, it takes 15 to 20 minutes, and every once in a while you test it. People have different ways of testing it, but how I was taught is you pick some of the grains up and you roll them between your fingers like this to see if the hull slips off. Once it gets to that point where you can easily slide that hull off, then it goes to the next step of hull removal. Traditionally, that was done by dancing on it, or it's also called jigging in some parts of the Great Lakes. It was done in barrels, or the way that I was taught from Roger was that you dig a bowl shaped hole in the earth, make sure you get all the little rocks, everything, so it's nice and smooth. Then you would put either deer hide over it, or today they would use tarps. You put something to hold on to, so you get two long poles, lash them to a pole standing straight up so you can hold on to those. You wear moccasins that are specific for ricing, so that you have nice clean bottoms. And you put some handfuls of that rice into the bowl, you grab onto the handles, and you stand so that the most of your weight is on the balls of your feet, and you move your feet back and forth, so you're kind of doing this twisting motion. And after a while, you will dance all of the hulls off. Well, then the next step is you have to get rid of the hulls. So you use a birch bark tray called a winnowing basket, and you take the rice out of the hole, put it in the basket, and you drop the basket. You don't throw it up. It looks like you're throwing it up, but you're dropping it down, 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 and all the wind will then blows away the chaff. Once you've got all the chaff out, then it goes to a final cleaning table where usually elders are and children. And they pick through there and they look for the grains that still have their jackets on, as Roger says. And they'll put those in another jar, then they will be reprocessed. And that's like the final cleaning. And then it's bagged up and preserved. That's a traditional way of doing it. It's very labor intensive. At the rice camps that they have now, it's a community thing, so there's a lot of people helping with the work. There's also, places that will commercially take care of the rice for you. You just bring them the rice, and they have big machines that do the parching and all of that. So it's a wonderful experience to do. I've been a wild foods gatherer my whole life, and for me, part of the magic of the wild foods and just it's the experience of it, right? It's the experience of collecting and gathering the rice when you're out there, or whatever else other food you're looking for. It's spending that time outdoors doing the processing, really connecting with what it is that you're going to be eating. And there's just nothing like it. Nothing like it.
Thank you for telling us about that. And that's your book, as I said, covers so much information, historical and cultural and practical and scientific. It's truly a remarkably diverse book. And you also have recipes.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
what's some of your one or two of your favorite recipes that you included?
Oh, my favorite recipe from there was entered by my friend Shiloh Maples, and I think it's called autumn salad. And
Oh, I remember that one.
yes, that one is absolutely delicious. The other one I really like is, I believe it's Rogers. Yeah, from Rogers Family. It's called Wild Rice Fruit Salad. That is also extraordinarily good. But I can tell you, you just can't go wrong with any of these. Wild rice is to me, very unique food plant because you can mill it and make wild rice flour and then make pancakes or biscuits or whatever you want to make with it. You can use it as a stuffing. You can use it as just a side dish. You can use it as a casserole. You can use it with chicken. You can use it as cereal. That's one of my favorite ways to eat it, is wild rice with blueberries and maple syrup or honey and some nuts. Oh man, it's so good. it's
So
so
if
versatile.
somebody wants to eat some of that
Mhm.
delicious sounding stuff
Mhm.
and they don't know how do they get a hold of some Manoomin?
Well, there's Manoomin that's patty rice. That's what most people get. Um, it's very easy to tell the difference. Number one, the price. So if you go to the grocery store and buy wild rice, or you could drive up on US 2 in the Upper Peninsula and it'll say 3 pounds for $9.99 or something like that. That's patty rice, predominantly grown in California. It's an agricultural crop that's been domesticated. If you are looking for true wild rice, I think I think it's going for 20 a pound now. There's not enough of it here in Michigan for people to really harvest it and sell it, because we've lost our giant wild rice beds. But you can go online and buy it from tribal ricers in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And I always like to point people to nativeharvest.com. That's from the White Earth Reservation. They sell their wild rice there. And I have a website. I don't really keep it maintained too often well, but it's called the Native Wild Rice Coalition.com. And there are some links to companies that are selling true wild rice up in the northern states here. I don't think I have any from Canada on that list, but it's hard to get. Um, that's for sure. You definitely have to go online, but being able to make the distinction that you are buying true wild rice, price is probably the easiest way to tell. The coloration is different also. True wild rice is usually multicolored grains. Or the grains are multicolored, so you might have some lighter colored ones, some darker colored ones, maybe a little olive color or brown or whatever. Patty rice is all black and shiny. It's all the same length. Very easy to tell the difference. Wild rice cooks very quickly. You should always put it in water and soak it overnight and then cook it the next day. And it takes 15, 20 minutes to cook. The patty rice, for me, I've cooked it in an hour and it still feels kind of, it doesn't have that. It's just not my favorite. Yeah.
Well, it seems appropriate to buy it from the tribal
Hmm.
lands.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And tell us what's next for you now that you've finished this book. Do you continue to work with these issues? Have you moved on to another book or related issues? What's going on with you?
Well, after the book came out, I'm still doing book tours, which is really great. Michigan, Governor Whitmer signed into law that that wild rice is now our state native grain. So that puts it back in the spotlight again. So I'm fortunate to get to keep doing my talks and help educate folks about it. I was part of, when I was still working, I was part of the Michigan Wild Rice Initiative, which is a lot of state agencies, federal agencies, all 12 federally recognized tribes in Michigan. They've just released a stewardship plan for wild rice for the whole state. Um, that was a huge effort by a lot of people and was a great leap from when we were first doing our little wild rice camps back in 2008 or 9 and had 15 people and dreamed about, wouldn't it be nice if someday everybody will work together in the state to protect rice? And here it is, it's happening. Um, I haven't been too involved since I retired a couple of years ago, and I still do my wild foods gathering and keep my ear to the ground about what's going on with Manoomin. But I've ventured into astrophotography and I'm learning solar photography and uh, doing some things I never imagined I would do. And it's
Well,
been
good for
quite,
you.
yeah, it's been quite fascinating. I think Being an endangered species biologist, I was blessed to be able to go out into the rarest of the rare places, looking for the rarest of the rare animals, right? And looking for wild, where we haven't put our human thumbprint on it and damaged it in some way. Well, now my wild is outer space and looking at galaxies and nebulas and something I've never paid enough attention to that I became knowledgeable about it. Now I'm learning and in amazement that we have the technology available to us now where I can actually take photographs with a telescope and it looks like it came from the Hubble just about. It's amazing. So that's what
I could
I've been
see why that would be captivating for you.
Mm-hmm. That's
As
what I
above, so below, as the saying goes.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
did I did release another book at the same time as the Manoomin book came out called The Amazing Adventures of a Midwestern Girl. And that's an autobiographical collection of short stories. And people really loved that one. And I've thought about putting out a second version, volume two. Um, so when I get the inspiration to sit down and start, I'll probably I'll probably have that be my next book. Maybe the only one I'll do again. I don't know. But
I know it's a lot of work.
it's a lot of
Definitely a
work.
lot of work.
Definitely a lot of work, but to have it, everything I do is to connect with people and to bring people together to connect. So if that happens and someone says, "Oh, I really related to that story," and then I hear their story, to me, that makes it all worth it.
Several times in our conversation, you've mentioned Roger. Would you tell us a little more about who Roger is and why
Yeah.
he's so important in your Manoomin story?
Yes, Roger is a tribal member of the Lac-Vieux Desert Band, Lake Superior, Chippewa, over in Watersmeet in the western Upper Peninsula. And I met Roger back in 2008. I was looking for a way to work with the tribes and collaborate on endangered species work. And I worked for Michigan Natural Features Inventory at the time, which is part of MSU Extension. Our tribal liaison for Extension said, there's this guy in Watersmeet who is wanting to do a wild rice camp. He's trying to get that tradition going again in their people. I can tell you that there's a multicultural mini grant available, and I'll help you apply for it, and then we can help fund the camp. So that's what we did. And um, he comes from a ricing family, and his uncle, Archie McGeejick, uh, taught him a lot about Manoomin. And their rice beds on Lac-Vieux Desert were greatly impacted in a negative way by a dam that was put at the mouth of the Wisconsin River. Their lake is the mouth of that river. During the logging era, there was a dam put in and it raised the lake levels, using it as a reservoir. And it essentially wiped out uh, the wild rice that was on that lake. And so Roger's uncle, he, in the last 10 or 15 years of his life, devoted himself to bringing rice back to that lake for their people. He passed away from cancer, but before he did, he talked with Roger and asked him to continue his work. And so Roger did. And we call each other brother and sister. We're very, very close. And he's been traveling around the upper and lower peninsulas since that rice camp we did in '08, teaching, returning the knowledge, trying to um, share what he knows with the tribal people as well as non-tribal people to bring this tradition of ricing back into the cultures here and to have the non-tribal people understand its importance to the Anishinaabe. The the main driver of that is their migration story, where the Anishinaabe people that are here today a long time ago used to live in what's now Maine, New Hampshire, up in that area. And they were visited by prophets and given prophecies. And two of the prophecies predicted white people coming across the ocean on logs blown by the wind, and that if the Anishinaabe people did not leave there, they would be wiped out. So they were directed to travel westward to the place where the food grows on the water, and that would become their new home. So they traveled down the St. Lawrence Seaway, made their way through the Great Lakes, and the food that grows on water was Manoomin. So it's a very important culturally to their identity as people. And he has worked really hard, along with lots of helpers, to try and share that knowledge and instill respect for the plant.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us your time today and sharing your wisdom and your perspective and your beautiful book, Manoomin.
Thank you. I'm glad
And
you enjoyed.
we'll be in touch.
All right, we'll find out about that malaria question.
Okay, yeah, that we're on that.
Yes. All right.
Okay, thank you, Barb Barton.
Mhm.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks to Barb Barton for joining us today on the Whimsy Farm podcast. Please visit her website, barbbarton.com, to find out more about her work as a singer and filmmaker. This podcast is produced on the sacred ancestral land of the Anishinaabe people. Thanks to the California band Castle House for writing and performing our music. Thanks to our underwriter, Just Play Productions, and to our paid Patreon members for their support of today's podcast. If you'd like to offer your support, please visit my website, whimsyfarm.net, and click the Patreon link to find a level of support that's right for you. There's also a free membership level. You can email me through the website as well. That's whimsyfarm.net. The Whimsy Farm podcast airs the 1st and 15th of each month on our YouTube channel, Carolyn Crane and Whimsy Farm, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. You can find links to audio and video and Patreon, all at whimsyfarm.net. Be sure to join me on September 1st when I welcome Jewish Poets for Palestine. Until then, remember the words of Utah Phillips, who said, "Too many good people are doing too many good things to afford me the luxury of being pessimistic." Get out there and create some positive change. Stay safe, everyone.
whimsyfarms.net